It is finally happening. After 20 years, Star Trek the Motion Picture, the Director's Edition, is finally being released in HD and Ultra HD. Getting over a cold, ladies and gentlemen, so I'm sorry for my voice. Needless to say, I am stoked. This is absolutely wonderful news. This movie gets a bad rep. And it's known in the Trekkie circles as Star Trek the Slow Motion Picture, which I can see why it's called that. Full disclosure, I too thought that Star Trek the Slow Motion Picture was an apt title for this movie. I think this movie has aged like a fine wine. As a young lad, I didn't appreciate this movie and all its themes and even the little character moments that, permeate the entire film. Now, I am stoked that the long-awaited Director's Edition will be released on Paramount Plus on April 5th, 2022. That's just a few days away. But I'm not going to watch it on April 5th, First Contact Day, by the way. I'm going to be a patient boy and actually wait for the theatrical re-release of the Director's Edition, which will be on May 22nd and 25th, 2022. I have not been to the movie theaters since the pandemic actually started. And of course, it would not be a new movie to actually get me back in theaters. It would be a re-release of a classic film, so I'm really excited for that. Now, I grew up actually on the Director's Edition of Star Trek the Motion Picture. I still have that 2001 DVD release, and that DVD is actually what I showed my friend, who is also a Trekkie. He hadn't seen any of the original movies before. But with the motion picture turning 40 years old, Paramount re-released the theatrical cut in theaters. And I did get to see that version of the movie just before the pandemic really started swinging. And while the theatrical cut is a slog and the inferior version of this movie, having the chance to see any of the classic Star Trek movies in theaters is just an opportunity I could not pass up. Even with the theatrical cut, I can say that this movie is something that is made to be seen on the big screen. I mean, it's just an epic movie-going experience, and there's almost no action whatsoever. What does the Director's Edition mean? Is it an extended cut? Is it a director's cut? What the hell does that even mean? Well, this isn't an extended cut. There is an extended cut out there to Star Trek the Motion Picture. It's from a TV cut, similar to what they did with the original Superman and King Kong 76. I have not seen this version, but many of those scenes featured in the Director's Edition come from that extended cut, and that includes my favorite scene in the film. My favorite scene in Star Trek the Motion Picture it's not in the theatrical cut of the movie. Now, the Director's Edition actually fits more in line with the director's cut, but not exactly. To understand why the Director's Edition came to be, you need to kind of understand the utterly tumultuous behind-the-scenes shenanigans of the making of this movie. There was no script out there for this film. There was no finalized script. There was a story, and there were many drafts, but this movie suffered from too many cooks. Roddenberry was being absolutely unreasonable. Robert Wise admittedly did not understand the source material, and the executives were watching the production like a hawk because of its massive budget, $40 million in 1979 money. Then you had Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner. They had worked into their contracts that they needed script approval, so this was just a jumbled mess from the beginning. The original special effects team tasked to work on this movie, they simply were not up to the challenge, resulting in Douglas Trumbo and John Dykstra coming on board extremely last minute. And I'm not exaggerating when I say the reels arrived in the Paramount stages, ready to be shipped out to the theaters, wet. And a lot of this came from Paramount refusing to budge from their December 7th, 1979 release date. Robert Wise lamented that he never got a pre-screening or even a final viewing of the completed movie before it hit theaters. He had said he never worked on a movie like that before in his career, and it left a sour mark in his mind. And that's because Robert Wise, despite relying heavily on both Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, and Bill Shatner for helping him understanding the source material, he was a true professional director. He cared about the films that he worked on, and his track record proves it. He edited Citizen Kane. He directed movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still, The Sound of Music, West Side Story, The Haunting, Run Silent, Run Deep, The Andromeda Strain. Jesus Christ, that is one hell of a career. And he started as an editor. That was his in at Hollywood. So seeing such a rushed final job on the movie must have killed him inside. What happened to this theatrical cut? Due to the rushed nature, several of the effects scenes were just not finished. Some sound design issues permeated the movie. Some scenes just dragged on and on and on. The pacing was just all over the place. And I mean literally, the editor, Todd Ramsey, literally put random gaps between reaction shots within the film. Then he had no choice but to fill those gaps with special effects footage regardless of the pacing. It shows. The theatrical cut of the motion picture isn't a theatrical cut at all. It is a rough cut. The planet Vulcan in particular really took a hit. You look at the shot of Vulcan with Spock walking up the steps, and there's no sky. It's just black. It's an unfinished special effects shot. Several matte paintings look just terrible. There's one of the Enterprise that really comes to mind. They look bad because it was so rushed. Yet the vast majority of the special effects shots in the movie are utterly stunning. Stunning. Plus, you have Jerry Goldsmith's score, arguably the best score of his career and one of the best scores ever composed. It carries much of the theatrical cut, especially the extraneous V'ger flyover sequences. Back to the director's edition. In 2001, Robert Wise approached Paramount, asking if he could go back into the editing room and make his cut of the movie. And Paramount said yes. He sat down with some new editors and recut the entire movie nearly shot for shot. You know, as if Robert Wise was an actual editor. This also had new special effects shots in it. But I love the mentality of people like David Fein. He specifically decided not to Star Wars Special Edition the movie. The new CGI effects would be made to look as if they came from 1979, as best they possibly could. And I admire that mentality to no end. They never went overboard with it. And it was simple stuff here and there, like fixing Vulcan, that was a big one, or the bad matte paintings, that was another one, so things like that. The result is an extraordinarily better paced and even movie. To me, the director's edition is the definitive version of Star Trek The Motion Picture. All that I just said is for the 2001 DVD release, not this 4K re-release. Why did this take 20 years? Why did it take 20 years for this to happen? And chances are you already know. Basically, the makers of the director's edition failed to foresee the future of high definition. These new sequences were rendered in 480i, not 1080p or even 720p, just standard definition. This edition just sort of stayed in limbo for 20 years, and for the longest time, that 2001 DVD was all we had. And this is what I ended up showing my friend. On the other hand, the theatrical cut got a full 4K release, and I thought that looked pretty solid. And then they dropped the trailer for the 4K re-release, and I just squealed like a little girl. Hopefully the Blu-ray release of the 4K version of the director's edition will have all the fantastic special features from the 2001 DVD, as well as the Blu-ray releases of the theatrical cut. But that's probably asking too much. Now this new release also has a new sound mix, which I am curious to hear. Now I have a 5.1 surround sound setup here in my little studio I have going on right now, and I thought the DVD sounded phenomenal, but I remember the theatrical cut in theaters sounding extremely front heavy, which makes sense since this was a movie from 1979. Fein boasts of a new Dolby Atmos sound mix for this version of the release, and I'm itching to check that out. But the thing that caught my attention the most is the fact that Paramount opened the vaults to Fein, not Robert Wise, since unfortunately he's dead, and basically let them rescan the original negatives of the movie in full Ultra HD. I would have been happy with just a 2K scan, like we often see with Criterion Collection, but 4K? Jesus fucking Christ, sign me up for that shit. They have also added some new scenes apparently between Ilea, Decker, and Scotty in engineering, and according to Feins, this scene was originally going to be added in the 2001 edition, but the footage had no audio. Well, since the 2001 release, the looped audio had been found. Now, 90% of the movie needed to be looped in post-production. So Fein, having found that source material, had the team add it back into the film. Apparently some other scenes have been added back into the movie, so I'm curious if it will add to the movie, or if I will actually prefer the 2001 release. I like any version of Star Trek the Motion Picture, but I bet I'll like it. Especially if Robert Wise wanted these scenes in this film originally, but this simply couldn't be due to the lost media. I'm pretty sure I'll like it. Fiennes mentions that there are 4 new scenes that Robert Wise wished to have been in the 2001 version of the movie, but simply couldn't. Now, I just wanted to read this passage from Fiennes because it exudes enthusiasm, and it shows that I think he gets this movie. This isn't a George Lucas reimagining or tweaking of things just for the sake of tweaking them. He said, quote, "One of the things that I have always said about the director's edition when we originally cut it, even to now, is that we found our captain. When you watch the original theatrical edition, he's really angry. I never felt that he was really the character of Kirk that he was supposed to be. Even Robert Wise didn't feel that it was right, but it was what we had to do to get the story together. So through editing, we were able to make him more human and more Kirk-like. If you pay attention to the story as it flows now, where I say it's compelling, I love how he's alone. He gets the Enterprise back, but he's not feeling overly secure. McCoy comes, he calls McCoy back, and he gets a little more confident. And then Spock shows up, and you see the joy on his face, like, I never thought Spock would be here. Spock's here. And it's such a story about the people, them coming together to face this amazing entity that's coming. Imagine just the thrill and the fact that this boldly went where no movie or series went before, and it launched everything. Even though it's still about the people, it still remains about the people, because after all, it's the human adventure, which is just beginning. If this passion that he's exuding makes it over into this new 4K restoration of the director's edition, I will be one hell of a happy camper. The human adventure is just beginning. I adore that slogan. It embodies Star Trek to me, and this movie, it really is why I hate ranking the original 6 films. This film just keeps climbing and climbing the more I watch it and appreciate it and let it sink in. The original 6 movies, those are my Star Trek. That's my Star Trek. I love all 6, even 5. I find a lot of good within 5. People say the motion picture is too slow, it's not character-driven enough, and I disagree. Is it flawed? Oh yeah, it's flawed. But not character-driven? It's full of good character stuff, from Spock coming to terms with his emotions, to Kirk coming to terms with his age, Decker finding his purpose, even V'ger wanting to know if this is all that there is. Is there nothing more? I love its themes, I love its stance on humanity, and humanity being good, not evil. Yes, we are flawed, but it's ultimately our flaws that make us want to triumph, to overcome them. Our ability to overcome our faults through hard work, by working with other like-minded people, it leads us to achieving the impossible. And that's Star Trek to me. Not this action, dark, brooding bullshit that we're seeing on Paramount Plus right now. But that's a can of worms for later. Maybe. Super excited for this release. I hope you are too. I'm definitely going to want to talk about it more later. Hopefully I'll bring in my Trekkie friend and we can talk about this, because I love this movie and I'm super excited to watch it with him in theaters. I'm so excited. Anyways, all my social media is in the description below. Hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching. And this is Adam Noyce of AN Productions saying sayonara.